Welcome to the program, Anais.
Yeah.
I'd love to start with the project Listen to the Rain, which I gather is scheduled for the year ahead. Tell me
Yeah.
about how that's going to play out.
The music is based on the theory of the five elements, which also includes the eight forces, which in the Taoist spiritual principles and philosophy also correspond to the wheel of time. So if you heard of the Book of Changes, and there are 64 hexagrams, which are a combination of yin and yang energies that describe basically like aspects of our DNA, but also they are in relationship with the cosmic dance. So with the sun movement and how it impacts our Earth and also our psyche and our archetypes, through which we understand human nature. And so, since the music is based on that, I found it interesting also to have it be listened to in the context of that cyclical time, which is why there are eight movements in the piece, and which correspond to the eight forces, which I'm going to cite now: water, mountain. Oh my God, I'm trying to cite them in the order that I'm going to
Thunder.
release them, which is, yeah, thunder. And then,
Well, I've got the notes in front of me. So it's wind, fire, earth, rain, and sky. And this plays out um, between, well, December 21st, the winter solstice was when you released water. We're going to get releases from you right up until the 3rd of November of 2025. Now, have these pieces all been recorded or will you record them over the course of the year?
they're all recorded already. Yeah, and they have been premiered. Premiered in 2021, recorded the same year. And they have been, yeah, and they have been performed in a different order, which is the order in which they appear like in a meditation context, and it's called the heavenly order. And if you bring them back into more like the everyday life, Chinese energetics, Chinese medicine context, then it's this earthly order in which I'm releasing them.
The idea of releasing an LP one piece at a time over 12 months, the full solar year, that's a completely different kind of listening experience. It requires the listener to come at it from a very different perspective. What's your intention?
So it looks like I'm specializing a little bit in durational stuff in general, and it's just, music is a time-based medium, and I really love how with the type of music that I made, I like to change our perception of time, and I also like to slow down in general. I guess as a person, I'm very slow and I very much identify with stillness and contemplation. And so usually and I love like rhythms and repetition and cycles, but I also love fractals, and I like how you think it's the same thing, but it's different, And so it's the same thing when you contemplate something. It's like the more you look at it and the more you actually like access the depth of it. So that's the kind of experience that I would like to hold space for with that calendar.
I wouldn't describe your music as still. I would describe it certainly as very calm. There's a very deep sense of presence to me when I listen to you perform. Are you conscious of that?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I definitely I spend a lot of time in silence, and to me, like my ethos as a musician is really about that intentionality. The intention before the sound is made is very important for me. So I guess even if I'm going to play something very intense and fast, which happens too, it still comes from a place of stillness or emptiness, you know.
At what point will you perform this work beyond the premiere that it's received? I'm fascinated. I have to tell you, I'm fascinated by the whole process you have planned. And I just have so many kind of practical questions about how do you promote it? How do you, how do you get people's attention? Like how do you roll this out?
Well, okay, so first I thought that it was like an amazing, I guess, I'm trying to find my place in the world of, it's a very fast-paced world that we live in. And it's also like very, we're overstimulated. So it's like, how do I present myself and the essence of what I propose with integrity without, basically like, yeah, without losing that sense of spaciousness that I think is very fundamental to my own experience of writing music. Also, when I perform, usually I hold space for a lot of spaciousness. Like the audience usually feels like they're kind of like in meditation mode. And so, if I were to do the promotion thing like it's usually done, it would somehow betray, the whole thing that that I'm proposing. So I find it, for me, it's like a fun experiment also in terms of what will it do in promotion. I mean, it's not too far out because like from traditional promotion in the sense that people will do a press release like maybe 6 months ahead and then 3 months and then 2 months, and so why not a year, and I'm hoping that I'm giving enough time for the right people who connect really in a genuine way to what I'm proposing to just gather, and it's, not everybody's jumping on the train like right on the first thing, but I'm really hoping that throughout the year, just there's like a magnetism that will bring people together around that practice. And to answer your initial question, it's amazing how things just come together because we got an offer to perform the entire piece at a festival in New York City that is called Long Play. I don't know if you heard of it, Bang on a Can. Which, it's called Long Play. And basically, like, what they do is like they do a lot of durational things, So like there we are, fitting perfectly in this thing. And the concert also happens to be right halfway through the release schedule. So I guess, we're having like a halfway through release show. It's gonna be May 3rd in Brooklyn at Issue Project Room in the afternoon. And we don't have the November performance planned yet, but we're thinking about it and scouting and seeing maybe if it might happen in Spain, where Joan, that and the label that is releasing the music are based. So, but yeah, basically we're going with the flow.
What you're describing, I suspect, will encourage a kind of focused listening among those who decide to follow this over the course of the year. You're going to listen to this work, I think, differently than you would a more conventional release. And I'm curious if you've thought a lot about that, and if so, what do you want that to look like? How do you want people to come to this work?
The thing is, I really cannot take full credit for writing my own music. And that's something also that I think a lot about. In the Western like composition paradigm, there's like a huge emphasis on like the author and like what did I mean, and it's one way to look at it. For me, it's like as if like all music already exists, it's already there in the universe, and as composers we just filter it through our own forms and then like offer up like one angle into the vastness of the infinity of sounds, and which has so much truth in it, right? And you can just look at it from so many different angles is still truth, but it just really looks and sounds very different. So in that sense, so first of all, I'm not like all knowing about my own music. And after, like, so I'm in the process of it. And of course, like, there's like a million like layers of research, and I'm geeking out about this and that, and the Fibonacci and the blah, 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 and like the numerology, symbolics, and all that stuff. Like, definitely, like, I'm having a lot of fun with esoteric concepts. My mission statement as an artist is like, I'm bringing spiritual concept into sensory experience, which is not easy. And the thing is about spiritual concepts, it's always a paradox, it's always like confusing, and you can't just grasp it like, if with just like goodwill and like good intellectual skills. It takes like a form of surrender, and it takes also like kind of like a sinking in. And so that's my own experience, like listening back to my music. I'm like, oh wow, like each time I listen, there's something new that I am integrating, and I just cannot control, that pace of like what the music is giving. So it's not like I'm expecting something specific from the listener other than taking the time to access various layers that are being offered by the music that I don't take full credit for, and that I know is connected to something that is greater than myself.
which includes the Rhythm Method, the group that you've recorded with. Tell us about them.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're really an incredible group. I'm so grateful to have crossed paths with them. So, yeah, it all started. So, they've been organizing a festival that is called Broad Statements in New York City, which is centering women and gender non binary creator of music and musical experiences. And yeah, I went to play to their festival. And when I heard them play for the first time, I just was like, woof, this is something else. And I grew up listening to a lot of string music because my brother is a violin player. So I feel very familiar with that sound of the string quartet. But I had never heard like a string quartet of all women. And just the whole thing was so different, and I couldn't put word to it, but I was like, wow, there's something different to the way that they play, and the way that they gather people also around music. And so, after the show, I was like, it would be great to write a piece for you, just FYI. And then, a few months later, we're like, why don't you come, like, here's a commission opportunity, and so it was the American Composers Forum. I applied, and it was, yeah, it went very fast. I actually was just like in the depth of studying Taoism and this theory of the five elements and that specific meditation that is called the fusion of the five elements. I was like all in it when they said like, hey, can you apply for this grant in 3 days? And so I was just so clear on like what was going on in my own research field. And so I just put it all into like a proposal. And then, there it was. I used this framework to develop my language as a composer. I had only through composed a vocal quartet back then, a 20-minute vocal quartet called B that I believe will also release this year. I'm not sure when exactly, but that's that's part of my plans, working on it. So it was new for me in terms of, they also pulled me in their world of notation, and they were very relaxed in terms of, I feel like I had the best initiation into string writing, because they let me, write basically like sounding pitches for all the harmonics, as like a kind of a geeky detail, but because I have my harmonic chart in front of me now, and I'm like, this is complicated, like it's really ever since I'm doing better. But back then, I was like, wow, like, like it was a lot for me to figure out. So, they let me really just come to it with my own hearing, because I really come from an oral transmission background. And what I write is really based on what I hear. And so they really supported me, into coming into their notated Western music world. And then also, I was like drawing the astrology charts, and I was like also bringing them into my my world and my way of approaching things. And so the music is really, really, really written for them. I really studied them as individuals, as musicians, as composers. They're all like very strong musicians. So it was a true encounter.
Am I correct in saying that the work was not recorded in a studio? It looked like you were in a farm setting of some kind.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, it's like a retreat center for artists that is called Looking Glass Arts, upstate New York. And yeah, at the time we got the invitation to come and record. And it's really, yeah, it's like a retreat, so it's like you don't go there to do a studio recording because it's a barn, it's a very old barn, and it's not insulated, and there's a road nearby, and there's like a creek, and there's birds, and it's just, you're very much like connected with your environment, which felt, at the beginning I was like, oh, like how are we gonna, what is that about? And then it made so much sense, when I listened back to the recording. So we didn't know if we were going to release it, right? It was like, okay, let's just document this moment. We had recently premiered the piece, so it was kind of like it was still hot under everyone's fingers. So we're like, let's just document it. And yeah, listening back and hearing all of these environmental interactions with the music felt, you know again, looking back, like brought another layer of depth, because it was all about that. And at the beginning, it was all about how the environment plays out into our experiences. So yeah, that's why I decided to release it in the end.
Your work has, for me, a real sense of tradition to it. Interestingly, I hear both a jazz and a classical music tradition. Um, but you sound, if I can borrow my own podcast's name, you sound very modern. And I'm curious if that's purposeful. Are you conscious of not simply copying those traditions? How do you think about the history of music when you compose?
It's very interesting because I used to be a scholar, and I used to be very harsh on on modernism. And I guess so. I grew up in France, first of all, and it's like modernism. It's like a whole thing that to me like brought a lot of deceit, like because of my Creole post-colonial experience. So it's like at the same time, like I really got fed by all of that modernist ideology, but at the same time, I really like strongly rejected it. And I went through like an entire phase of, as a vocalist, not being able to use any language. And I really, that's kind of like how I first build my sound. And I guess that's how I just like stumbled upon like jazz and then free jazz, because I just could not sing a song. I just, and that was really like, that was like a strong reaction to Eurocentric culture in general, to like this cultural hegemony, and with modernism like kind of like at the center of it. However, as I was saying, I grew up my bro I grew up listening to my brother practice violin, so I'm very much like kind of like my ear is very much trained in that sense, like with the Western canon. On the other hand, my mother is Haitian, and she's also a composer, but much more like kind of, she writes musicals, and it's like Afro-Caribbean, and it's all orally transmitted. She has like a gospel choir, so it's I kind of had like those two things that didn't coexist very well where I grew up. It was like either you do it like the Euro way, or then you do world music, but it's like you can't. So, jazz was a little bit like my way to be, well, I'm kind of like Afrocentric, but I'm also Eurocentric, and and there's like other layers, because then I started studying Indian music, and so it seemed like jazz was kind of the place where I could find myself, at least like on at the theoretical level. Because jazz has its own tradition and its own, like, all cultures. I believe that like any culture is meant to change all the time, and like that's kind of the meaning of tradition. Tradition is not like museum, it's not rigid. Tradition is just like a connection to the source that brought about various cultures, and culture is always responding to a societal need, like it's always responding to like what is needed in the moment. So, the tradition is kind of like the style with which we respond, but we're always responding. And so, yes, I'm very connected to tradition in that sense. I'm very, very much interested in like source. And I like to pull the threads of any cultures that I've been influenced by. I like to see like, okay, but under this and under and under and under. And then I always find kind of a common ground, a common source of humans' way to cope with, being in this dimension on this planet, dealing with like cosmos and also like matter.
I love the way you put that innovation is not anti-tradition, it is the tradition.
Yeah, and I'm very thankful for my scholarly years to help me articulate that. And because it somehow like I needed like to intellectually give myself the permission to be that and do that, be connected to tradition, but at the same time be a little bit like unheard of, but I'm definitely, I'm not a traditionalist, but I'm definitely like connected to tradition. Yeah.
From an instrumentation perspective, certainly working with a string quartet is quite traditional. Um, are you interested in electronics? Do you use modern technology in your work at all?
Yeah, I have, I'm always like flirting here and there with electronics, but I've never gotten my hand around like kind of like a setup that felt empowering. But it's definitely like, it's there, like it's always there. I've done like a piece here and there using electronics, but it's like not, I haven't like really like dove in there.